good?
Mhm.
Okay. Now you're making me blank. You did this to me. You did it.
I'm sorry.
I was like right there, and then I just like looked, and I was like, "Bleh, bleh."
Oh man,
Well,
it's
welcome
hard.
to another episode of Gaming at the Round Table. This is episode 5. Welcome.
You said that. Welcome again.
Welcome.
Well, we'll continue to do it.
Yes. So we're back again with Crystal, Jojo, and myself, Maverick. We're all Alan Knights from Alan Knights Media. And today I think we're going to start with Crystal's topic. So go ahead and kick us off.
Um, so what are some of the games that you guys had originally started with? Like, what got you into playing video games?
What made us gamers?
Yeah, what made you gamers?
Addicted personality. But most likely, for me, I don't think it was the first game I got big into, but it's definitely the game that my father hated the most. So I know I played it a lot, which was Sonic the Hedgehog back in the day, because he quotes that there was that ding, ding, ding with all the rings you'd collect.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he said, yeah, totally great. But when I would hear you guys die, he'd be in the back room going, no, because it's going to start all over. You're going to have to hear those million rings again. But I definitely would say that it's not specifically platformers, because I think for the generation in which I started gaming, most of the games were platformers or platformer like, but they were definitely all 2D. Later on, we got some really great 3D games like what was GoldenEye 007.
You're
That's
taking
cool.
every game I can think of.
All right, I only list one more that was formative for me, really changed my perspective on gaming, which was the Mega Man series and the Mega Man X series. That was huge in getting me to be a gamer. There were a lot of things like games that impacted me beyond that in different ways. Like I used to play, I forget what, Ace Combat, but like the OG Ace Combat, and it had airplanes. And so obviously that was a big factor. But I think if I had to quote one series of game or even one game, Mega Man X, for sure. It's just the creme de la creme original side scroller shooter.
Well, for me, outside of the games you've already listed, I would think the first game that I actually played on a system and it like sticks out almost instantly is the original Mario's on Super Nintendo. Because
Yeah.
I think the first system that me and Matt had in the house was Sega. So
Mhm.
that's where Sonic comes into play, and then a few of those game titles that come with that original system. But I think the first game where we actually sat in a room and played it was the original Mario's,
Mhm.
and it was there was a couple of them, but the other one I could think of is the original like Street Fighters.
Oh yeah.
Those definitely like were they built onto that, and then Tekken on the original PlayStation. I think that one right there is like if you're
PS1.
an old school player, that whole series of games I think set the tone for a lot of other games along with Street Fighter because they were both fighting games but their styles were so drastically different.
Mhm.
And I just remember the first time playing Tekken where we were in I think it was like a snow map. And the fact that you could like spin the camera and see how massive the arena was. Like it was mind blowing. Because before it was always you have one fighter and then another fighter and then you just go at each other. And you can maybe jump up and down, move back and forth, and that was the extent of like the level outside of that. But definitely Mario was the first game that got me into gaming as a whole, and then it just built off of that.
In fact, I recall playing Tekken in our neighbor's house,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to even for the original console and the Sega. I can think of several, but like the PS1, Monster Hunter, which was like a JRPG where you could put in like legitimate other game CDs,
Music
and it
CDs too.
right, you could put in anything that was a circular disc that could be read by the scanner, and it would register as one of the monsters in the game. So it was kind of like, imagine Pokemon where instead of catching Pokemon, you would get Pokemon by putting in discs into your console, and it would be a random Pokemon based on the disc.
Mm-hmm.
And the game series was Monster Hunter, I'm almost positive. But like the PS1 era was so dominated by this idea of Tekken that it's hard to think of other games. And
Ace
I'm sure we
Combat.
played them. Yeah, they were there.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not easy. You really have to think about it because so much of our time was spent on the fighting game because it was cooperative. Well, you were killing each other, but
Yeah.
it was something you could sit there and someone else could sit there and you'd be playing it for hours on end until you got mad at each other.
Well, I think GoldenEye was the first one where you could get mad at each other because it was the first time. I remember the first time seeing 4 controllers hooked into one system.
Oh yeah, N64, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that was revolutionary. And then they had a Rumble Pack,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's when memory cards started to become much
Well, on
more
PlayStation
common.
they had them, but I remember playing a game and we wouldn't turn the system off because we didn't have a memory card, and if we didn't,
Yeah.
you would lose everything. So we'd leave that system on for days.
I just remembered what you're talking about, where right above the controller input, there was another little slot for the little memory card. That was back when you had to purchase memory because the consoles basically didn't have onboard memory. Yeah, that was fun.
So where did you start, Crystal?
I started with Donkey Kong Country back on
That's
the,
a good one.
what was it, the Super Nintendo?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I loved that game. And then moving forward, one of the games that I dived in really hard was Sly Cooper.
He looks kind of like a raccoon or something like that.
He's a thief.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah, you know, like they're similar to like Crash Bandicoot or Spyro. And then moving from there, I just had it on my head, in my head. Kingdom Hearts.
Oh,
Kingdom
was
Hearts
that
when I was a
PS2?
teenager. Yeah.
I was gonna say that was a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for us.
Yeah.
For us.
I'm
So old.
7 years younger than Maverick and what, 8 years younger than you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means you're really young because I'm like 21.
That is a joke. That is a joke.
Total joke.
Oh my god.
A 21-year-old that played Mega Man X when it came out. Yeah, sure.
No, Kingdom Hearts was big when I was a teenager.
Kingdom Hearts was almost revolutionary in its own way too, because I don't recall anyone else that did it, especially not at that time. And I definitely recall being absolutely ecstatic and blown away by the fact that the Final Fantasy makers were teaming up with Disney. The fact that Disney was teaming up with anybody, let alone like this Japanese RPG type, they seemed like completely different universes.
I mean, they
at the
still
time
very much do seem like entirely not fitted universes.
Yeah, I definitely agree overall. But Disney, especially currently, has much more adult-oriented things than they used to.
Marvel.
Yeah.
All of
Right.
Marvel.
You know, and
Even
that's
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Exactly. You know, people are shooting at each other and killing each other, or trying to anyway. Whereas, at least in the, let's say, the 90s, Disney was definitely more of a, here's a cartoon movie. And like the most death you saw was like The Lion King, right?
That was heartbreaking. Okay, that was like traumatizing as a kid.
We saw it in the theaters.
God.
In the Florida Keys.
What year did that come out? Now I want to know.
It's not important.
It doesn't need to be repeated.
People
That's how long
Google
ago.
That. It's got to be like 30 years ago.
I'm not going to say the year, but I'll tell you I was 1 year old when that came out.
That adds up. That adds up.
Yeah, to harken back to the origin of gaming, it's hard to pinpoint like which exact game really set you on the path to being a gamer. And I'm going to say something maybe controversial. I think gaming back then was, it had to be good and it had to be complete because
Yeah.
you had one shot as a game developer. And it was much more. Right now consumers, we complain a lot, but we actually legitimately put up with a lot. You pay for a game that you can't even own or play because you pre-ordered it. You pay for games that are purposefully and openly acknowledging that they're not complete upon release, right? The whole landscape is just a completely different beast. But if you were to go back 30 plus years or whatever, when a game came out, they either did well or they didn't. That was it. And they knew, hey, whether this game is complete, has bugs, doesn't have bugs, they can't patch it. It's on a physical medium.
Well,
And
even then, I feel like games didn't have nearly as many bugs as they do now.
Well, they couldn't release it with the
maybe
possibility of as many bugs.
it
Like there
definitely
were
was,
definitely
yeah,
games that like had big problems when they got
but they
released.
failed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe there were amazing games that could have been great all-time classics, and I'm sure that some of those released had too many bugs or too many game-breaking bugs, and then they just absolutely failed because that was their one shot, right? So you can imagine. I'll take Final Fantasy VII. I think came out around 1997, give
There's
or take,
96, 97 in there.
right? So that was 4 CDs that they had to manufacture
Hmm.
into their case. The case itself was nice for the time. It certainly wasn't, a non. It was non. It cost them money, right? They gave you a pamphlet, 4 different CDs packed to the brim with the data that they could fit. That's why they had more than one. And that was in a store, sealed. So, in order to play this, you couldn't even torrent it, right? Torrenting wasn't a thing, or certainly wasn't known well back then. You went to a store, you bought it, and that was it. If that didn't work, garbage.
Yeah,
And you tell all your friends, and no one would buy it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think if there was a game that came out and that was just bad, like just bad when it came out.
That's the big problem too, is that since we were kids, right? Our parents would have had to, the age of the internet. Oh God, the age of the internet wasn't really a thing. So if your parents were going to put money into a game, they had to have even heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. My parents, when they bought me my very own PlayStation, they went to the sale section of video games and they bought me Sly Cooper and Dr. I don't know, some weird.
It's probably because it was on sale.
Yeah. Well, we're
on
not
sale.
talking about sales. We're talking about new games, right?
Yeah, but I'm saying like not every parent is going to buy a brand new game. Like a lot of
Totally.
parents would buy their kids used games because they're more affordable.
You're absolutely correct. But even then, you're still talking about a 7-year difference, right? Um,
Yeah.
Games wouldn't have been as in demand after the fact. So,
Yeah,
Final
my
Fantasy.
parents also used to play video games, so I guess that counts for something too.
Yeah, that means they were technically like inside of the know compared to like our parents who had
Yeah.
zero understanding of gaming
Yeah, they saw
whatsoever.
Pac-Man and Tetris, right? Everything else was a modern game.
I mean, we had computer games on what was the original, the Macintosh,
Like actual Macintosh.
and you had, and again, we're gonna seem old as dirt right now, but floppy disk and things like that, where you had to install it with like 15 of these things, and it would take forever. You would just like one, and then you would see the bar just like loading, and then it would be like Oregon Trail.
The only game I think I've ever seen on a floppy disk was Doom.
Yeah.
That's it. My games growing up for computer were on a disc.
This just is
I'm not
starting
old.
to degrade.
I'm not old. I'm not old.
Oh god. So what was the premise we were going with here? You know, games that got you onto your current path.
Oh, actually, on the note of the games we've been talking about, you mentioned Final Fantasy VII.
Mm-hmm.
So, on that topic, how do you feel the new one compares to the old one?
So that's a trick question because the new one is actually multiple games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's start. I'm going to start with that topic. I love the idea of expanding upon a remake such that you really get your money's worth. And they're definitely doing that. So I give credit where it's due there. What I personally don't like is this is no longer the game, right? This is not Final Fantasy VII. It's not the same combat system. And whether people think, oh, that's just archaic, only old people like turn based strategy, which obviously with Baldur's Gate 3, that's been completely nullified. But it's just not the same game. It'd be like saying we're playing Monopoly, but not using dice or figures or cash. You know what I
But
mean? Like
can't
it
you
just
turn it
looks
on?
like maybe
I
you
thought
can.
that you could turn on the turn based if you wanted it.
I would have to look back and confirm. Let's just
Mm.
assume you're correct. It's clearly designed to be played in a more real
Modern.
time combat
Yeah.
type way. It's certainly all their demos are going to show it like that. And while it is good, it's quality, it's polished, it's just not the game anymore. And to
Mm-hmm.
me, that's not a remake. It's like a re envisioning. They're just not the same game. And I know that they're not supposed to be, but I kind of wish they just
I
didn't
mean,
call it Final Fantasy VII.
well, not only is it Final Fantasy VII, isn't it Final Fantasy VII Remake is like the name or Rebirth,
I think
Yeah,
Rebirth.
because they have different.
which is close in name. It's like I don't know. It's a little weird to me.
That gets to the second thing that I'm not a huge fan of with it, which is the fact that it's coming out as multiple games.
Yeah, the
So
second
are you?
part just came out.
It might even be the third.
I
They
think it's
had
the
like
third.
they had an interlude or something like that.
I'm behind.
Interlude, intermission, whatever it was called.
Mm.
So I'm not a fan, and this has nothing to do with Final Fantasy specifically in terms of the remake. Just generically speaking, I don't think I want to see the gaming landscape get any more towards the thing we've been talking about throughout multiple podcasts, where it's the content isn't there upon initial purchase. And I think this is the boss's final form of that, which is outright not even just releasing more content and expansions and patches and DLC, but straight up making you're going to have to buy multiple full price AAA title games to play this game.
And this
right?
is why their games go on sale so quickly.
I didn't say that. We're a very tiny company. Let's not make enemies.
Well, I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm just being honest. It's a fact. Look at every pre-owned Final Fantasy game you see, and they're like pocket change at that point. You know, like I could go to Walmart and buy the first Final Fantasy 4 or Final Fantasy 7 part for probably $8. So instead of getting it full price, you just gotta wait. But that's still your point still stands, right? You know, there's people putting it on pre-order and whatnot to get it ahead of time. So
there are other factors that cheapen it, like the fact that it's designed to be a single player experience. So once you've experienced it, what do you need, right? So there's a lot of factors. But to finish my thought here, which is I think the final form of where we've been gradually going in a negative way as consumers in the gaming industry is being seen live right now by everyone, all generations of gamers. Right now, we're seeing the worst incarnation yet and hopefully ever of continuous content. I think the idea that, and it's a perfect example because we're clearly trying to say that this is a remake of one game from the past. So it's not like a new idea or concept. It's literally, here is one game that we are now going to sell as multiple games.
Hmm.
And it's it's like watching uh trying to say non-political here. So to me, it's I feel like that Indian from a commercial where there's a piece of trash on the natural wilderness and he's like just crying, like, oh, maybe you haven't seen that because your face is blank. There was an old commercial where this Native American was looking out at pollution basically, and they show a close up of his face and he's like quiet, tearing up, and whatever. It was famous for the time. But that's how I feel right now, where I'm watching the last hoorah of what gaming should be not only finally go down, but everyone is just, here's my money for it.
Yeah. Well, what I appreciate is that if you look at some companies, they're getting better about certain things. So, oddly enough, it's a lot of the free to play games, although I guess they have the money to do it. But you look at games like, Fortnite, for example. Okay. When you think of playing Fortnite, in my head before I actually played it, right? It was just a battle royale. That's all I saw it for. It was just the one game that you downloaded. But now you get Fortnite Battle Royale, you get Fortnite Lego, you get Fortnite Rock Band, you get all of the extra things that people have
Racing.
made. And it's like, here's all of this content that you could do for free. And, you know, it's from start to finish, if you will. So hopefully, a lot of the companies that are doing games that you have to pay for will get their stuff together now that they're seeing a lot of these free to play companies do this. Although, then again, who knows? They might go free to play and do gotcha as well. So who knows? I don't
I
know.
think that's a. I think that's the big. If you look at I'd say pick 5 AAA titles right now, and I guarantee you at least 4 of them are inside of that free to play model,
Yeah, freemium
or
going.
they have some extended version of what they're doing, where you have to purchase a battle pass or do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know that there's one game, like, again, try to just think of 5 off the top of your head. I do not use a battle pass system right now.
Baldur's Gate.
So the only ones I can think of, and there are a few, but they're all the same type, which is a traditional role playing game that's
Which
story
takes them
driven.
out of it.
Right, exactly. But they're probably also not making anywhere near the amount of money. Sans Baldur's Gate 3, which is good job, Larian.
Seriously.
Because I'm pretty sure, like, I can go into Xbox Marketplace right now and look at, like, the top games currently being played.
Mm.
And for sure, at least 3 of them are going to be shooters. And they're going to be inside of that network of buying stuff. Where it wasn't the game that it, because there's a couple games right now that are massive games when they first came out, were nowhere near as big as what they currently are.
Mm.
Yeah.
And as the years have gone, that's the one thing I do give Fortnite absolute credit for, has been their ability to improve over time. It's not the same game that they started with, not even close. They improve their mechanics, they improve their everything. That I'm okay with, because again, it's improving the experience as you're playing. Where
Yep.
some of these other games have been around, and I don't want to call out certain titles because I'm not trying to start anything, but that was one thing that I noticed, was that at the new gen of certain games, I felt like I was looking at the old gen version of it.
Mm.
And it made me so angry that I had just paid like $50, $60 for this new one, and it looked exactly like the older one.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I'm a visual snob or whatever it may be, but if I'm looking at the new model of something,
Yeah.
I should be looking at improvement.
That actually gets onto a topic that I know we definitely didn't discussing today, but it really heavily reminds me of what I saw happen with Disgaea, and maybe you guys have seen something similar. So whether you know the Disgaea series or not, it doesn't really matter. But it's a zany turn-based. It's crazy and it's a JRPG. It's not for everybody, but I think it went from 5 to 6 or 6 to 7, one of those numbers in there, and it changed from 2D graphics, which looked really really good. The artwork was just beautiful, and then it went to 3D graphics. And so the vibe of the game was still there. It was this zany, silly RPG and all this other stuff, but the graphics from 2D to 3D to me felt like a step backwards. So 3D technology is considered, generically speaking, more modern and more robust than the 2D technology, especially if you think about gaming's history, right? 3D was not an option. You didn't play 3D Pac-Man, 3D Tetris, like it wasn't possible. The computing power wasn't there. But now we have games that are 3D that can sometimes look worse or at best equal to their original counterparts, which were in 2D. And I thought that that was very strange to see the next gen of this series go to modern technology and look worse. So I can definitely feel what you're describing.
I think part of the reason for that is that when there was that leap between the old gen and the new gen, and I would say it was between like the 360 era and the PlayStation 3 and 4. I believe it's in that age, that era of gaming, when it was supposed to be like, oh, this is the new gen of gaming. But a lot of these gaming companies had already been designing and making games on old gen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they had these companies saying like, "Oh, we're going to kick out this new stuff." But again, they didn't have like a back catalog of games that are going to be coming out with this new gen. They maybe had 5 maybe that were
Mm-hmm.
going to be next gen exclusive games. So what happened is you had these companies trying to produce these next gen games with old gen hardware, because even in their studios they had these older model buildups where they were trying to design the game to work on these systems, but they didn't have the newest gen. Would it be software or hardware? Like either way, but they didn't have what they needed to make the new stuff. But then they're selling it as this is next gen, but yet you have a 10-year-old system that obviously isn't going to be running at this new gen thing. And they're going to think that nobody's going to sit there and notice it. And we're just like, this
Mm-hmm.
isn't 60 frames, whatever. Like, this isn't even close.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we'll land on our sword here, but part of the reason that we have given ourselves this our own time limit of just a couple of years to get our indie game made. There's obviously a financial aspect to it, but also you don't want to run the risk of outdating yourself, right? If you start making your magnum opus and it's the best thing the world will ever see, but you get it out in the next gen console, well, hopefully graphics and processing power weren't part of what made it so amazing, because you'll already be behind the curve.
That kind of answers the statement in and of itself. I think there was such big leaps in gaming in such a short amount of time
Yeah.
that a lot of these companies couldn't keep up with those leaps. Whereas the gaming, like the PlayStation, the Microsoft, the Sony's, they were hell bent on getting the next best thing, which I don't blame them in doing, because electronically, like if you are a year behind or 2 years behind electronically, you're in the Stone Ages. So for them, they're just like, well, you either keep up or see ya. But obviously, gamers as in the community are kind of suffering for it.
Yeah. Especially in that era, I think it was much more rampant then. Uh, in my opinion, the most significant leap, visually at least, but I would even wager processing wise was the PS2 to the PS3, because that's when, even outside of gaming, HD became a thing. Again, dating ourselves, and so be it. But high definition was literally not a thing in the PS2 era. It doesn't matter whether you tried design for it. It'd be like designing for technology that doesn't exist. You can't, right? So the PS3 came out, and they did have some really impressive initial games that were designed for it. I remember one of the very first ones was this shooter game, classic zombie-esque enemies, Resistance Fall of Man. And we had to buy a new television because the PS3 had HD graphics, and this game was like, oh, play the game in HD on your little 24-inch non-HD like junk. So that was the first era in which it wasn't sufficient to just get a better console. You had to get a better everything. You had to buy not only a TV, well, I hope you have an HDMI cable, right? So for me, that was the first and honestly the only super obvious leap in technology, at least during my lifespan, that was so impacting that it didn't matter who you were, you noticed the difference. Were there differences between the PS1 and the PS2? Oh yeah, for sure.
Well,
But
see,
for a casual, sorry, go ahead.
the PS4 to PS5, visually, there wasn't much difference. Speed wise, there was
Yeah,
a
processing.
big difference.
Yeah, but you have to have a PS5 to notice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think it was, what was it, the 3 or the 4 where the Blu-ray era started.
Yeah. Was that
I think
4 or
it was,
3?
I feel like it
I think it was 3.
Isn't 3 when HD started? So
We all
they
have
also
computers.
did.
But they were the only ones
We
that
all
had
have
a
access to the internet. We could find out.
But I'm pretty sure that was when the Blu-ray, because it was one of the only systems outside of an actual Blu-ray player that had that ability. And that changed the ability for that system because it could run games with Blu-ray quality stuff.
Wow, you're totally right. So, according to the internet, Sony's PlayStation 3 was a crucial factor in Blu ray's victory over HD DVD. The console came with a Blu ray drive built in. I could have swore that was the PS4. So, yeah, wow. PS3 really totally changed the landscape of not just gaming, but apparently
Consoles.
It was
consoles.
even home entertainment.
Right. That's a
Yeah.
great term. I was
That's
racking my
when
brain.
everybody went from using their DVD players as their main sources or their DVRs or whatever to primarily using their PlayStations for everything.
Wasn't that same era the first era where you started to see like control sticks?
Yeah.
With the wireless control sticks, so you'd have
It
like
had
the
that little
white
ball on the
bulb.
top. Yeah.
Right, motion capture or whatever, but wireless. Is this not ringing any bells? Okay.
I think it was inside of that or towards the back end of it.
So
But they called it, no, it wasn't mocap. It was
it's very similar to what we see built into switches now, where your remotes are, you can motion control them and stuff. So you play tennis with your remote control and there's no wire.
that was the Wii.
Yeah, but that, I think that was the same era as the PS3, because I remember owning
Yeah,
the
because
little stick
the same era was GameCube.
in GameCube. Oh, what a great console! And they got absolutely annihilated. I think it was because people could rip their games too easily.
I think so.
Anyway, we have veered very far off our track. Very far off.
It's a natural conversation and a good one at that.
Oh, yeah.
It was going to go from formative games to memory lane here.
But I don't think you can have that conversation without it being inside of that growth. Because again, you can't mention like, oh, I played Sonic and GoldenEye, and then not explain why those things were so big. That's like bringing up Halo. Like the original Halo Combat Evolved changed the landscape of gaming. And
oh yeah,
And for the time, a lot of people thought nothing of it.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't even a big thing, and then it just exploded.
You would just go to your friend's house and you guys would have like either a local LAN party or you would just, local play. And I agree. You mentioned something really important, which is gaming evolved much more naturally in those in these era, and all of the big games we can list right now are of a genre or straight up the same type of game that was huge 20 or more years ago. First person shooters, GoldenEye, period.
Mm-hmm.
Real time strategy games, StarCraft or Command and Conquer, whichever was your cup of tea, but they were from the same era. And once those came out, that type of game was forever compared to these originators. And there are, I can think of one type of game that's popular that didn't exist back then that I know of, and it might have existed back then, which is a roguelite, where you go down until you die and then you respawn and you're expected to die over and over and over.
Yeah.
What about battle royales? Weren't big back then.
Well, they stem from
the
shooters.
Or shooters, yeah.
Yeah, and in some ways they stemmed a little bit from what are they called? MOBAs, like League of Legends, which itself came from StarCraft as a custom game mode, and Blizzard was very, very upset because they thought they had proprietary rights to every game that the people made on their customization system. That's why you don't see these too often anymore. So people made games inside of games back in the day. That's how amazing gaming was.
I mean,
in its golden era.
Think of Fortnite.
But you have to give up your rights to your creation.
Yeah, they make that clear now.
Yeah, but that was not really covered back in the day. And so StarCraft or Blizzard tried to take League of Legends because they were like, well, this spawned from our game creator, and so we have rights to it. And they lost that case. And now every game maker, not just Blizzard, Activision, but everyone across the board, if they have some sort of game mode where you can customize your game, guaranteed 100% that you're accepting some agreement that says any creative rights that you make in this are now like ours. That way, if you make a really famous, let's use Fortnite. Fortnite has custom games, right? So let's just call it fishing in a barrel. And you make a little mini game in Fortnite where you fish in a barrel. If that became huge and popular and someone decided to make fishing in a barrel the game, they would instantly get sued into the ground by by Epic Games. Like they'd go down quick. I don't know why I got on that tangent.
It's the argument that everything that's out now stem from those.
Yeah. And so your original question is like, how did we become gamers? We kind of conversationally evolved that to be, how did we become who we are? But yeah, the history of gaming is important when you think about what made me a gamer. Because there are many parts along, especially if you're older than 15, right? There are many parts of your gaming life that could have ended your being a gamer. And if the industry hadn't kept evolving, and thankfully it still does, eventually everyone would suffer the same fate, which is this was fun for the first 5 years, but how long can you use the same recipe and enjoy the meal?
Yeah.
So all of these technological leaps that we're reminiscing about and stories we're telling, I think really answer your original question, which is what made us gamers? Yes, there were those OG games, but that's not enough, right? It was the progression of the gaming industry that really kept us as gamers. And it still does, despite my lament of how the industry is so greedy right now.
I feel the need to mention that Pokemon was huge to me growing up, because I did not mention that, and now I'm offended by myself for not mentioning Pokemon, because I've played every single game.
On which system?
Well, I
What was the
started on
first
a
one?
Game Boy.
There we go.
Yeah, all
But
right.
Yes, okay.
You know,
Red
when
or
it had
blue?
the 50 attachments, I had red and blue. Thank you very much.
Ooh,
Well,
fancy.
we got the way my parents split it up is one of us got one and the other one got the other.
Yeah.
That's how it was for my brother and I, but my brother never took off in Pokemon. So I would just use his
Just
Game
play
Boy
his.
and my Game Boy and like play both of the games. Or
Did you have a cable where you
I
could?
eventually ended up having the cable and I would do the trades. I even had 2 Game Boy Advances, the little square ones. I had one that was red and one that was blue, and I would trade between the two. I was crazy when it came to Pokemon, so I'm surprised that didn't come to mind when we were talking about our childhood games. That was my childhood.
It's a lapse in memory
I'm
from
sure
her
as
young
soon,
age.
her young age. As soon as we stop talking, all of us for sure are going to be like, I can't believe we didn't mention X or Y or Z.
Yeah.
That's why I had to
Oh,
throw
yeah.
Halo in there. I was like, there's no way I'm having this conversation and not throwing that in there somewhere.
Yeah,
Trying to
and
think.
Xbox had some really formative games too. You mentioned Halo is probably the. When I think of
Dead
Xbox,
Space.
yeah,
The
Dead
original
Space.
Xbox.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Xbox original because you can't say one anymore. Yeah, Xbox for a time, it
Ah.
felt like they were even going to demolish the PlayStation. There was a period of time there where Sony was losing.
That's a
Minecraft
whole
was
nother
also
conversation. Is that those system battles?
Yeah. And
They're
they used to be
scary.
more popular too. You'll
Yeah.
still see them on like Twitter, people just being mean to each other.
Facetious.
I feel
Yes.
like people have switched from, and this could just be because I'm a PlayStation.
Oh, that's our timer reminder.
Wow. But it could be just because PlayStation is what I play on. But I feel like I mostly hear people saying between PlayStation and PC now, rather than
Yeah,
but
because
that could
Xbox
be
isn't
because-
even in the conversation anymore. He's been long forgotten. It's a shame, really.
No. Oh my god! But I was gonna say maybe it's because Xbox is Microsoft, so it's part of PC.
Xbox.
I'm sorry.
We're sorry for your loss, Joe.
Which is technically an extension of a computer.
It
Yeah,
feels
that's-
so mean. Where's Switch? Where's Nintendo in this whole conversation?
They have wonderful titles, but I don't think anyone seriously thinks that they're contenders for performance or anything like that, and they're not designed to be. And I think they did a really good job at their marketing of we're making family games, party games. We're just here to have fun. Like we're the hippie of the consoles. We're just be cool, man.
The Nintendo is for the real casual gamer
Mm-hmm.
or
Yes.
like a child.
Yeah, like if you're a snooty gamer and you want to weed out your
You play
dating
PC.
pool, you ask someone, what console do you
PC.
own?
No, you don't ask them for a console. You go to PC. That's
Oh,
what you
she's
do.
right. I just got weeded out.
Oh my god.
I got dated while trying to date.
No.
Playing checkers while someone's playing chess.
Yeah, she's 3D chess over here. Thought I was clever. Okay, I know we had one more thing on the docket, but I am really not good with memory puzzles.
I think it'll push the conversation like a lot because it could be either a short conversation or a long one because it kind of ties into a lot of different things. And it might be a conversation for another podcast, but I think it was the one that I had, and I'll give the exact wording right now. Hold on. If I can find my mouse. There we go. 2 seconds. Pardon the pause. How hard is too hard in gaming?
Mm-hmm.
That is an entire podcast.
And again, it stems into so many different conversations. Like it's just a big bite, and I think we'll save that for another one.
So tentatively, something to look forward on the next podcast is how hard is too hard, and we could also talk a little bit about what do we think that perfect Goldilocks zone is,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously, if we're going to make a game, well, we don't want it to be too hard or too easy. It's got to be just right. So yeah, something to look forward on the next podcast.
So who wants to do the outro?
You.
Have you done one yet?
Me? I did the first and the second.
And I did the last one.
That's also true. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Gaming at the Round Table.
Hold
This was
on,
episode
we're going to have to
5.
edit this one.
And he cut me off. We're keeping this.
We are.
All right,
We're keeping this. This is our outro, and I hope everybody laughs at it. I'm not editing this out. But again, thank you for joining us. Please check out our YouTube or Spotify's for our episodes and our reviews on YouTube as well. Again, this was Jojo, Maverick, and Crystal. Thank you for joining us.